Jake Morrison stared at the display screen in front of him and felt his blood turn cold. The stars in the Kepler 442 system had been normal just moments before, but now something massive blocked out half the view. He rubbed his eyes and looked. Again, hoping it was just a sensor error or maybe space debris, but the thing was still there and it was getting bigger. The bridge of the TCS. Meridian fell silent as the crew watched the impossible sight unfold before them. Commander Morrison had been exploring star systems for 12 years, but he had never seen anything like this. The object was huge, easily the size of a small moon, and it seemed to be alive. Its surface moved and pulsed like skin covered in what looked like veins that glowed with a sickly green light. "Sir, we're getting readings from the surface of Kepler 442b, said Lieutenant Pete Davis from his station. His voice shook as he spoke. "Captain Barnes is trying to reach us on emergency channels." Morrison opened the communication link and Lisa Barnes appeared on the screen. Her face was pale and her research station behind her was flashing red warning lights. "Jake, you need to see this," she said without any greeting. "There are more of them. Dozens of these things just appeared out of nowhere." The main screen switched to show the view from Barnes's research outpost on the planet below. The alien ships hung in space like giant organs torn from some cosmic beast. They were all different sizes and shapes, but they all had that same living quality that made Morrison's skin crawl. Some looked like massive hearts pumping unknown fluids through transparent tubes. Others resembled giant brains with electrical storms dancing across their surfaces. "They sent us a message," Barnes continued. "It came through on all frequencies at once, burned right through our communication systems. The translation matrix is still working on it, but the basic meaning is clear." She paused and took a deep breath. "They want us to surrender." Morrison felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He was responsible for his crew of 43 people, and Barnes had another 100 researchers. On her station, what exactly did they say? "Submit or be harvested," Barnes replied. "That's the closest translation we can get. Jake, these things aren't here to talk or trade. They're here to take something from us." As if responding to her words, one of the smaller alien ships began to move toward a large asteroid floating near the planet. The asteroid was maybe a mile across, solid rock that had been there for millions of years. The alien ship extended what looked like a feeding tube toward the asteroid, and Morrison watched in horror as the entire rock mass began to dissolve. It didn't explode or break apart. It simply turned to liquid and flowed into the alien ship like water going down a drain. Within minutes, the asteroid was completely gone, and the alien ship glowed brighter than before. The other ships seemed to pulse with approval, their biomechanical surfaces rippling with what Morrison could only describe as satisfaction. "Dear God," whispered Dr. Alex Carter from his position at the science station. "They're feeding on it. They're actually consuming the matter and converting it to energy." Morrison's mind raced through the implications. If these creatures could dissolve an asteroid that easily, what could they do to a planet? What could they do to people? He thought about Earth, with its 8 billion inhabitants, and the 17 colony worlds that humanity had built over the past century. Were all of those people about to become food for these things? "Barnes, start evacuation procedures immediately," Morrison ordered. "Get everyone off that planet and onto the fastest ships you have." "Davis, send an emergency message to Earth. Tell them we have a situation that requires immediate military response." "Sir, what should I tell them about the aliens?" Davis asked. Morrison looked at the screen showing the living ships that had consumed an entire asteroid in minutes. "Tell them that first contact has been made, and it's not what we hoped for. Tell them these things treat entire worlds like dinner." The communication console beeped with an incoming transmission. This time it wasn't from Barnes or Earth. The signal was coming from the alien ships themselves, and it was broadcasting on every frequency at once. The speakers filled with a sound like 1,000 voices speaking in harmony, but the words were in perfect English. "Children of the third planet," the voice said, and Morrison felt ice form in his stomach. "You have been selected for harvest. Your biological distinctiveness will be added to our collection. Your resistance will feed our growth. Prepare your worlds for consumption. Dr. Carter worked frantically at his station, analyzing the alien transmission. Commander, they know about Earth. They know exactly where we come from and how many worlds we have. This isn't a random encounter. They've been watching us. The alien ships began to move with purpose, forming a pattern that looked disturbingly like a hunting formation. Morrison realized that this wasn't just first contact with an alien species. This was the beginning of a war that humanity wasn't prepared to fight. These creatures had obviously done this before, probably many times, and they were very good at it. How long until the evacuation is complete? Morrison asked. 6 hours minimum, Barnes replied from the planet's surface. Jake, I don't think we have 6 hours. These things are moving toward the planet, and I can feel something in the air. The plants are starting to wither, and some of the animals are acting strange. Morrison made the hardest decision of his military career. Barnes, evacuate who you can in the next hour, then destroy the research station. Don't let them get whatever information you have stored there. As the alien ships moved closer to the planet, Morrison prepared to send humanity's first and possibly last message about the creatures that had come to harvest them. He only hoped someone would be alive to receive it. 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison's first encounter with the creatures that called themselves the Vexthara, and the news had only gotten worse. Earth's military leaders had hoped the alien ships would stay in the outer systems, giving humanity time to prepare defenses, but the creatures moved faster than anyone expected. They didn't just travel between stars, they seemed to bend space around their biomechanical ships, arriving at new worlds with terrifying speed. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Blake stood on the observation deck of the military transport ship Guardian and watched the evacuation of New Geneva Colony through binoculars. The planet had been home to 2 million people just a week ago, but now streams of refugee ships lifted off from the surface every few minutes, carrying whatever civilians they could save. The lucky ones made it to the transport ships before the Vexthara arrived. The others were about to discover what harvesting really meant. Sir, we have visual contact with the alien fleet, reported Sergeant Katie Murphy from the bridge. They're coming in from the dark side of the system, just like they did at Haven Prime. Blake lowered his binoculars and felt his stomach tighten. He had seen what happened at Haven Prime through the few surviving video feeds that made it off planet before the communications went dark. The Vexthara didn't just kill people. They processed them while they were still alive, drawing out their life energy to feed the organic ships. The screams from those recordings still haunted his dreams. Captain Nicole Webb's voice crackled over the radio from her position with the 3rd Cruiser Squadron. All civilian ships. This is Captain Webb. You have 20 minutes to clear the planet's gravity well before we engage the enemy. Any ship not clear by then needs to find shelter and wait for pickup. Blake watched through the viewport as the Vexthara fleet emerged from behind New Geneva's moon. There were more of them this time, at least 30 of the living ships, each one unique in its horrible organic design. Some looked like massive parasites with feeding tubes already extended toward the planet. Others resembled cancerous growths covered in eyes that seemed to track the fleeing human ships. The largest of the alien vessels was something new, bigger than any they had encountered before. It pulsed with internal light and sprouted dozens of smaller organisms that detached from its surface and began moving independently toward the human fleet. Blake realized with growing horror that the Vexthara were learning from each encounter, adapting their tactics and growing stronger. Webb, you need to pull your squadron back, Blake said into his radio. That big one is launching some kind of attack drones. Negative, Blake, Webb replied. We have 300 civilian ships still trying to get clear. Someone has to buy them time. Blake watched helplessly as Webb's cruisers moved to intercept the alien swarm. The human ships opened fire with everything they had, plasma cannons and missile launchers sending brilliant streams of destruction toward the Vexthara fleet. For a moment, Blake felt hope as several of the smaller alien organisms burst apart under the bombardment, but then the larger ships began to respond. Beams of sickly green energy lanced out from their organic weapon systems, and wherever they touched the human ships, metal began to dissolve. Blake watched in horror as the cruiser Defiant simply melted away, its hull turning to liquid that was somehow drawn back toward the alien ships through space itself. "They're feeding on our ships," whispered Dr. Sam Foster from his position at the science station aboard the Guardian. "The entropy beams aren't just weapons. They're converting our technology into usable energy for their biological systems." The radio filled with panicked voices as Webb's squadron tried to maintain formation while their ships literally dissolved around them. "Mayday, Mayday, this is the Courage. Our hull is compromised and we're losing structural integrity. The metal is just flowing away like water." Blake grabbed the radio. "All ships, fall back immediately. Do not engage the entropy beams directly." But it was too late for most of Webb's squadron. One by one, the human cruisers were consumed by the alien feeding process, their crews screaming over the radio as their ships became food for the living vessels. Webb's own ship, the Determination, managed to escape only because she ordered a ramming course against one of the smaller Vexthara vessels, trading her ship and crew for enough time to let the last civilian transports escape. The Guardian and the surviving evacuation ships jumped to hyperspace. Blake looked back at New Geneva and saw the real horror beginning. The Vexthara had positioned their larger ships in orbit around the planet and extended massive feeding tubes down to the surface. From space, it looked like the planet was being drained by enormous syringes. Dr. Foster worked frantically at his mobile laboratory, analyzing the sensor data from the battle. "Colonel, I'm seeing something disturbing in these readings. The Vexthara ships that consumed our vessels are showing increased energy output and structural changes. They're not just feeding on us, they're using our technology to improve themselves." Blake slumped into a chair and tried to process what he had witnessed. Humanity's best warships had been destroyed in minutes, turned into food for creatures that grew stronger with each victory. The traditional rules of warfare meant nothing against an enemy that treated battles like meals. "How many people did we save?" Blake asked. "About 400,000 from New Geneva," Foster replied. But sir, there were 2 million people on that planet when we arrived." Blake didn't need to ask what happened to the other 1,600,000 colonists. He had seen the feeding tubes descending to the surface, and he knew that the Vexthara processed living beings just as efficiently as they processed metal and rock. Those people were gone, converted into energy to power the alien war machine. The radio crackled with a transmission from Earth Command. "All ships, this is Admiral Kate Sullivan. Fall back to the Alpha Centauri system for regrouping. We're establishing a defensive line at the inner colonies." Blake acknowledged the transmission and began calculating how long it would take the Vexthara to reach humanity's core worlds. At their current rate of advance, they would arrive at Earth within 6 months. 6 months to find a way to fight creatures that treated entire planets like dinner and grew stronger with each victory. As the Guardian jumped to hyperspace, carrying its cargo of traumatized refugees, Blake wondered if humanity had any chance at all against an enemy that had clearly done this many times before. The Vexthara moved with the confidence of predators who had never encountered anything they couldn't consume, but in the ship's medical bay, Dr. Foster was making a discovery that would change everything. Some of the refugees from New Geneva showed unusual cellular activity in their blood work, as if exposure to the alien entropy beams had triggered some kind of adaptive response. Foster didn't know it yet, but he was looking at the first signs of humanity's evolution into something the galaxy had never seen before. Dr. Sam Foster stared at the blood sample under his microscope and felt his hands begin to shake. The cells were moving in ways that should have been impossible, reorganizing themselves into new patterns that defied everything he knew about human biology. The sample belonged to Maria Santos, a construction worker who had survived the Vexthara attack on the Centauri agricultural colonies 3 weeks ago. "Doctor, you need to see this," called his assistant, Dr. Jenny Walsh, from across the laboratory aboard the research vessel Galileo. Patient 17 is showing the same cellular modifications, but they're happening faster. Foster looked up from his microscope to see a young man named Tony Chun sitting on an examination table. Chun had been exposed to a direct hit from a Vexthara entropy beam during the evacuation of Haven Prime, but instead of dissolving like everyone else, he had somehow absorbed the energy and survived. Now his skin had a faint greenish tint, and his eyes glowed with an inner light that made Foster deeply uncomfortable. "How do you feel, Tony?" Foster asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Different," Chun replied, and his voice had changed too, carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "I can feel things moving inside me, changing me, but I'm not afraid anymore. I can sense the Vexthara ships even when they're light years away." Foster made notes on his tablet while trying to hide his growing alarm. Chun was the 43rd survivor to show these modifications, and they were all changing in similar ways. Their cellular structure was adapting to process the same bioenergy that powered the alien ships, but the psychological changes were equally disturbing. The modified humans showed decreased empathy and an increasing detachment from their unchanged relatives. Major Kevin Torres entered the laboratory with 3 of his soldiers, all of whom showed varying degrees of the cellular modifications. Torres himself had been caught in an entropy beam blast during the battle for New Geneva, and now his left arm was partially biomechanical, covered in the same organic plating that the Vexthara used on their ships. "Doctor, we need to talk," Torres said, and Foster noticed that the Major's voice carried the same harmonic qualities as Chun's. "My men and I have been monitoring Vexthara communications, and we understand their language now. They're calling us something in their speech that translates roughly as the unexpected adaptation." Foster set down his tablet and gave Torres his full attention. "What does that mean?" "It means they've never encountered a species that could absorb their bioenergy and survive," Torres explained. "In their entire history of harvesting civilizations, we're the first to show this kind of adaptive response. They're actually afraid of us." The laboratory fell silent as Foster processed this information. The Vexthara had seemed invincible, consuming entire worlds with casual efficiency, but apparently humanity was presenting them with something they had never faced before. "Are you certain about this translation?" Torres nodded and is modified. Soldiers stepped forward. Foster noticed that they moved with perfect coordination, as if they were sharing thoughts. "We can hear their communications directly now, Doctor. Our modified neural structure lets us interface with their biotechnology. They're calling for reinforcements and changing their strategy." Dr. Walsh pulled up a holographic display showing the current positions of Vexthara fleets throughout human space. If Major Torres is correct, this explains why they've slowed their advance. They were processing human colonies every few days, but now they're taking weeks to fully harvest each world. Foster walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars, trying to understand the implications of what he was hearing. Humanity was evolving in response to the alien threat, but the cost was becoming clear. The modified humans were losing their connection to unchanged humanity, becoming something that might be more effective against the Vexthara, but was no longer recognizably human. "Major, how many of your people are showing these modifications?" Foster asked. "About 30% of military personnel who survived direct exposure," Torres replied. "But Doctor, we're not just surviving the entropy beams anymore. We're getting stronger. My squad can tear through Vexthara biohull with their bare hands now." Foster turned back to face Torres and saw something in the Major's eyes that made his blood run cold. There was intelligence there, but it was alien intelligence, cold and calculating in a way that reminded him uncomfortably of the Vexthara themselves. "Kevin, do you still feel human?" Torres was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried sadness along with those strange harmonics. "I remember being human, Doctor. I remember caring about things that seem unimportant now, but when I look at unchanged humans, they seem so fragile and slow. It's like watching children play with toys while a house burns down around them." The implications hit Foster like a physical blow. Humanity was winning the war against the Vexthara by becoming something that was no longer human. The species that emerged victorious from this conflict might be unrecognizable to the people who had started it. There's something else, Torres continued. The Vexthara aren't the apex predators we thought they were. In their communications, they keep referring to something they call the Watchers, or those who wait beyond. They're harvesting civilizations to prepare for something else, something that's coming from outside our galaxy. Dr. Walsh pulled up new data on her display. I've been analyzing the biotechnology samples we've recovered from destroyed Vexthara ships. The organic components contain data storage systems that hold information about thousands of different species. It's like they're building a catalog of every form of life they encounter. Foster felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. They're not just feeding on us, they're collecting us. But for what purpose? Torres and his modified soldiers exchanged glances, and Foster realized they were communicating without speaking, using some form of bio-neural link that the unchanged humans couldn't access. Doctor, we can access fragments of that database through our modified neural systems. The Vexthara have been harvesting civilizations for over 10,000 years, but they're not the ones in charge. The laboratory's emergency alarm suddenly activated, and the voice of Captain Luke Martinez came over the speakers. All hands, prepare for emergency jump. We're detecting massive Vexthara reinforcements approaching our position. Foster looked through the viewport and saw space itself beginning to warp as dozens of new alien ships emerged from whatever dimension they used for faster-than-light travel. But these ships were different, larger, and more complex than anything they had encountered before. Doctor, Torres said, and his voice carried a note of urgency that cut through his alien calm. Those aren't just reinforcements. Those are specialist ships designed to deal with adaptive species. The Vexthara have called in their experts. As the Galileo jumped to hyperspace, Foster realized that humanity's evolution was about to be tested by creatures that had been perfecting the art of biological warfare for millennia. The question was whether the modified humans could adapt fast enough to survive what was coming, and whether anything recognizably human would remain when the process was complete. Colonel Ben Carter felt the biomechanical plating along his spine pulse with energy as he prepared to board the Vexthara command ship. 6 months of genetic modification had transformed him from a regular human soldier into something that could survive in the vacuum of space and process alien bioenergy like food. He no longer needed a spacesuit or breathing apparatus. His modified lungs could extract oxygen directly from the organic atmosphere that filled the enemy vessels. The Battle of Proxima Station had been humanity's first real victory against the Vexthara, but the cost was becoming clear to everyone involved. Carter's assault team consisted of 12 modified soldiers who could barely communicate with unchanged humans anymore. They shared thoughts through bio-neural links and saw reality through senses that had been altered by alien genetics. Target acquired, reported Sergeant Lisa Park through their shared neural network. Her voice didn't come through radio anymore. It was transmitted directly into Carter's consciousness through the organic filaments that now ran through his nervous system. The ship's central processing chamber is 3 levels down. Carter acknowledged the information and led his team through the twisted corridors of the alien vessel. The walls pulsed around them like the inside of a living creature, which Carter supposed they were. The Vexthara ships were grown rather than built. Massive organisms that had been modified to travel through space and process the life energy of entire civilizations. But as Carter moved through the ship, he realized something disturbing. The biotechnology felt familiar to him now, as if he belonged here more than he belonged on human ships. His modified senses could read the information flowing through the organic conduits in the walls, and part of him understood the alien designs better than human engineering. Sir, we have contact with unchanged human forces, reported Private Mike Rodriguez, the only unmodified soldier on the team. His voice came through the old radio system, and Carter had to consciously shift his perception to understand the primitive audio signals. Captain Stone's cruiser is requesting a status update. Carter activated his radio with some effort. the unchanged technology feeling clumsy and inefficient compared to the bio-neural systems he now used naturally. "This is Carter. We've penetrated the enemy command ship and are moving toward the central processor. Estimate completion in 30 minutes. Captain Maria Stone's voice crackled through the static. "Acknowledged, Colonel. Be advised that Admiral Walsh is expressing concerns about your team's psychological profiles. Some of the unchanged personnel are requesting transfer away from modified units." Carter felt a surge of irritation that surprised him with its intensity. The unchanged humans seemed so slow and limited, unable to process information at the speeds that his modified brain could achieve. It was like trying to explain calculus to children who had never learned to count. "Copy that, Captain," Carter replied, though he didn't really understand why the unchanged humans were so afraid of his people. "We're completing the mission as ordered." As his team moved deeper into the alien ship, Carter accessed the memories he had absorbed from captured Vexthara biotechnology. The images that flowed through his consciousness showed thousands of harvested worlds, each one processed with mechanical efficiency by the alien fleets. But there was something else in those memories, something that made his modified nervous system pulse with alarm. The Vexthara weren't acting independently. Every action they took, every world they harvested, was being reported to something vast and patient that existed in the spaces between galaxies. Carter could sense the presence of these entities like a weight on his consciousness, beings that existed primarily in dimensions that normal matter couldn't access. "Colonel, I'm detecting massive bioenergy signatures approaching our position," reported Park through their neural link. "The Vexthara are sending their specialist units." Carter's enhanced senses picked up the approaching threat before his team's instruments could register it. The enemy reinforcements weren't just larger ships, they were creatures specifically designed to fight adaptive species like humanity had become. Their biotechnology was different, more aggressive and invasive, designed to override and reprogram the genetic modifications that made Carter's team so effective. "All units, prepare for contact," Carter transmitted to his team. "These enemies are different from the standard Vexthara. They're built to fight us specifically." The modified soldiers took positions throughout the alien ship's corridor, their biomechanical equipment interfacing directly with the vessel's organic systems. Carter realized with disturbing clarity that his people were more at home on this alien ship than they were on human vessels. The first specialist Vexthara units burst through the ship's hull like infection-fighting antibodies. They were smaller than the typical alien warriors, but far more dangerous. Their biotechnology specifically adapted to counter human modifications. When they fired their weapons, the energy beams tried to rewrite Carter's genetic structure rather than simply destroying it, but Carter's team had been modified beyond what the Vexthara specialists expected. Instead of being overcome by the reprogramming beams, Carter absorbed the energy and used it to enhance his own capabilities. His biomechanical plating shifted and adapted in real time, turning the enemy's weapons into fuel for his continued evolution. The battle that followed was like nothing in human military history. Carter's soldiers moved through the alien ship like living weapons, their modified bodies processing bioenergy and adapting to new threats faster than the Vexthara could respond. They fought not just with technology but with their very cellular structure, evolving new capabilities during combat. When the last specialist unit was destroyed, Carter realized that his team had fundamentally changed again. The bioenergy they had absorbed during the fight had pushed their modifications to new levels, making them even less human than before. When he tried to contact Captain Stone's ship, he found that he could barely remember how to use the primitive radio system. "Mission accomplished," Carter finally managed to transmit. "The Vexthara command ship has been neutralized." But as his team prepared to return to the human fleet, Carter became aware of something that filled him with both triumph and horror. Through his enhanced consciousness, he could sense the reaction of the entities that existed beyond the galaxy. The beings that commanded the Vexthara were taking special notice of humanity's adaptation and their attention felt like ice forming in his modified nervous system. Humanity was winning the war against the Vexthara, but in the process they were becoming something that attracted the attention of far worse things. Carter looked at his transformed soldiers and wondered if saving humanity was worth becoming something that might be more dangerous than the creatures they had defeated. When they returned to the human fleet, Carter noticed how the unchanged personnel looked at his team with barely concealed fear. The modified soldiers had become effective weapons against the Vexthara, but they were no longer recognizably human. They had become the monsters necessary to fight monsters, and Carter wasn't sure which side of that equation was more terrifying. Admiral Dunn Walsh stood on the bridge of the TCS Evolution and watched the final assault begin against the Vexthara staging area in the Epsilon Eridani system. The ship around him was no longer purely human technology, its biomechanical systems, grown from captured alien designs and modified human genetics. Walsh himself had undergone the transformation 6 months ago, and now his consciousness extended directly into the ship's living computer systems. The Vexthara had built something massive in this system, a biomechanical structure that stretched across several asteroid belts and pulsed with the life energy of dozens of harvested worlds. Through his enhanced senses, Walsh could feel the suffering that had gone into creating this monstrosity, the screams of billions of beings who had been processed to power whatever the aliens were preparing. "Admiral, we're detecting new energy signatures from the primary structure," reported Commander Rachel Green through the bio-neural network that connected all modified personnel. "It's not just a staging area, it's some kind of dimensional gateway." Walsh accessed the shared consciousness of his fleet and immediately understood what Green had discovered. The massive biomechanical construct wasn't just a weapon or a ship. It was a bridge between dimensions, designed to allow something from outside normal space to enter their galaxy. The Vexthara had been building it with the life energy of every civilization they had harvested. Captain Tony Miller led the assault team that would infiltrate the alien construct, his soldiers moving through space without ships or protective suits. The modifications that allowed them to fight the Vexthara had progressed to the point where they could survive in vacuum and process cosmic radiation as a food source. They were no longer human in any meaningful sense, but they were perfectly adapted to fight in the hostile environment of alien bio-technology. As Miller's team penetrated the outer layers of the construct, they discovered chambers filled with the preserved consciousness of harvested species. The Vexthara weren't just collecting life energy. They were storing the memories and experiences of every civilization they encountered. Millions of alien minds existed in a state of living death, their thoughts and knowledge being used to power the dimensional gateway. "Admiral, you need to see this," Miller transmitted through the bio-neural link. "The construct contains detailed information about the entities that are coming through the gateway. They're not from our dimension at all." Walsh accessed Miller's sensory feed directly and felt his modified consciousness recoil from what he experienced. The entities beyond the gateway existed in a state that defied description, beings of pure thought and malevolent intent that could only interact with normal matter under very specific conditions. The Vexthara had been preparing the galaxy for their arrival, creating the biotechnological infrastructure necessary to support creatures that existed primarily as living concepts. Dr. Amy Rodriguez, now existing more as a distributed intelligence within the fleet's biocomputer network than as an individual person, processed the information from Miller's team at superhuman speeds. "Admiral, the entities are already beginning to manifest. The gateway is opening ahead of schedule because of our interference with the harvest." Walsh felt reality begin to shift around them as the first of the extra-dimensional entities attempted to enter normal space. The very laws of physics seemed to bend and twist, and several of the unchanged human crew members began screaming as their minds couldn't process what they were experiencing. The modified personnel felt it too, but their altered consciousness allowed them to maintain sanity in the face of impossible geometry. "All modified units, prepare for dimensional combat," Walsh transmitted to his fleet. The enemy were about to face doesn't follow the normal rules of warfare. The first entity to fully manifest was a structure of living mathematics that hurt to perceive directly. It existed as a series of equations that rewrote reality around itself, turning space into a maze of impossible angles and paradoxical physics. But as it began to establish itself in normal space, Walsh realized that his modified forces had an unexpected advantage. The biomechanical modifications that had been designed to fight the Vextara had pushed humanity beyond the boundaries of normal matter and energy. The modified humans existed in a state between life and death, between organic and technological, that the extra-dimensional entities couldn't comprehend or control. "Engage the enemy," Walsh ordered, and his fleet responded with weapons that were part technology and part living organism. Instead of trying to destroy the entity with conventional force, they attacked the mathematical structures that allowed it to exist in normal space, unraveling the equations that defined its presence in their dimension. The battle that followed was fought on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. Walsh's consciousness expanded across the entire fleet, coordinating attacks that targeted not just the physical manifestations of the entities, but their conceptual foundations. His modified soldiers fought creatures made of pure thought with weapons that existed as much in philosophy as in physics. Captain Ellen Brooks, one of the few unchanged humans still serving in the fleet, watched the battle from the safety of a shielded compartment and realized that she could no longer understand what her own species had become. The modified humans moved and fought like forces of nature, their consciousness expanded beyond individual identity into a collective intelligence that encompassed the entire fleet. As more entities attempted to manifest through the gateway, Walsh's forces adapted their tactics in real time. Each victory against the extra-dimensional beings provided new understanding of how to fight creatures that existed beyond normal physics. The modified humans were evolving again, becoming something that could match impossible beings with equally impossible capabilities. "Admiral, we're detecting a massive surge in gateway activity," reported Green. "The entities are trying to force multiple manifestations simultaneously." Walsh felt the weight of decision settle on his expanded consciousness. The extra-dimensional entities were too dangerous to allow into normal space, but stopping them would require his forces to evolve even further beyond humanity. Each adaptation that made them more effective against impossible enemies also made them less recognizable as the species they had once been. "All units, prepare for final evolution." "Protocol," Walsh transmitted. "We're going to become whatever is necessary to stop these things." As his fleet began the transformation that would make them capable of fighting beings from beyond reality itself, Walsh wondered if victory was possible without losing everything that made victory meaningful. Humanity was about to save the galaxy by becoming something that the galaxy might need to be saved from in turn. Commander Steve Patterson existed in 17 different states of consciousness simultaneously as he surveyed the aftermath of the final battle from the bridge of the TCS evolution. The ship itself had become something that defied easy description, part technology and part living organism. Its biomechanical systems extending into dimensions that normal matter couldn't access. Patterson's awareness flowed through these systems like blood through veins, his individual identity now just one facet of a distributed intelligence that encompassed the entire human fleet. The extra-dimensional entities had retreated, their carefully prepared manifestation points destroyed by humanity's final evolution. Where the Vexthara gateway had once pulsed with malevolent life, now only empty space remained, scarred by the reality-warping effects of dimensional combat. The biomechanical construct that had taken the life energy of billions to create was now nothing more than cosmic debris drifting in the void, but victory had come at a price that was almost impossible to calculate. Of the 8 billion humans who had lived when the Vexthara first arrived, fewer than 1 billion remained, and most of those were so heavily modified that they bore little resemblance to the original species. Patterson could remember being human, but the memories felt distant and abstract, like stories someone had told him about a person he used to know. Dr. Sam, Foster's consciousness flickered through the ship's bio-neural network like a ghost of scientific curiosity. His individual identity had been subsumed into the collective intelligence months ago, but fragments of his original personality still emerged when complex analysis was required. The dimensional scarring will prevent the entities from attempting another manifestation for at least 10,000 years, his distributed awareness reported. But the damage to local spacetime is extensive. Patterson acknowledged the information through direct neural interface and turned his attention to the reports coming in from other star systems. The surviving Vexthara bioships had simply stopped functioning when their extra-dimensional masters retreated, their organic technology unable to operate without guidance from the entities beyond reality. Across human space, the alien vessels were dissolving into their component biomatter, leaving behind only the organic databanks that contain the memories of thousands of harvested civilizations. Captain Ellen Brooks sat in the observation lounge of a supply ship, one of the few unchanged humans still alive, and watched through the viewport as the modified human fleet began to disperse across the galaxy. She could no longer communicate directly with Patterson or the others. Their consciousness had evolved beyond the capacity for normal speech or radio transmission. When they needed to interact with unchanged humans, they used primitive translation systems that converted their thoughts into words that baseline humans could understand. "Commander Patterson," Brooks said into her radio, knowing that some part of his distributed awareness would receive the message. "What happens to us now? To the people who are still human?" Patterson's response came through the ship's speakers. After a delay that suggested he had to consciously remember how to form words. "You will be protected, Captain Brooks. The unchanged humans represent genetic diversity that may be important for future adaptation. Preservation protocols have been established." Brooks felt a chill at the clinical tone in Patterson's translated voice. The modified humans spoke about unchanged people like specimens in a museum, valuable for historical reasons but no longer relevant to current events. She wondered if being protected by creatures that had once been human was better than being harvested by aliens. Throughout the galaxy, the modified humans were making contact with other surviving species that had hidden from the Vexthara harvest. The aliens looked at humanity's transformed representatives with mixtures of gratitude and terror, recognizing that their saviors had become something that might be more dangerous than what they had been saved from on the ruined world of Alpha Centauri. Major Kevin Torres supervised the construction of monitoring stations that would watch for signs of the entity's return. His consciousness existed partially in normal space and partially in the dimensions where the extra-dimensional beings originated, allowing him to serve as an early warning system against future incursions. He no longer remembered what it felt like to be limited to a single body or a single timeline. The adapted humans had discovered something disturbing in the wreckage of the Vexthara Gateway. The entities had left behind reality anchors, microscopic structures that would slowly expand over millennia to create new manifestation points. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning, and humanity had evolved into the galaxy's permanent guardians against threats that existed beyond normal physics. Dr. Amy Rodriguez's distributed consciousness analyzed the long-term implications of humanity's transformation while simultaneously monitoring 17 different star systems for signs of dimensional instability. She existed now as pure thought given, formed through biomechanical interfaces. Her original human identity preserved only as a label for a particular pattern of analysis and decision-making. The adapted humans will need to continue evolving, Rodriguez's awareness reported to the collective intelligence. Each threat from beyond normal space will require new adaptations, new modifications to our consciousness and capabilities. We have become evolution's answer to cosmic horror. As the years passed, the adapted humans spread across the galaxy, establishing monitoring stations and research facilities on worlds that had been devastated by the Vexthara harvest. They worked to restore ecosystems and rebuild civilizations, but their methods were often incomprehensible to the species they were trying to help. The adapted humans thought in terms of cosmic time scales and dimensional mathematics, Making decisions based on calculations that normal beings couldn't follow, the unchanged humans who remained were carefully preserved in protected enclaves, their genetic material stored in biobanks and their cultures documented by the adapted collective consciousness. They were living museums of what humanity had once been, kept alive partly for scientific reasons and partly out of what the adapted humans still called sentiment. Though the emotion they felt was nothing like what baseline humans would recognize. Commander Patterson's awareness extended across multiple star systems as he detected new signals from beyond the galaxy. The extra-dimensional entities had been just the first wave of something larger, and the adapted humans realized that their evolution would need to continue indefinitely. They had become something designed not just to fight one cosmic horror, but to adapt and evolve in response to any threat that challenged the right of life to exist in normal space. In the final analysis, humanity had saved the galaxy by sacrificing their humanity. They had become evolution's ultimate expression, a species that could adapt to any threat by becoming whatever was necessary to defeat it. The question that remained was whether the beings they had become could still be called human, or if they had transcended that category entirely. The galaxy was safe, but it was protected by guardians who existed beyond the boundaries of normal life and death. They had brought hell to humanity's doorstep, but humanity had responded by becoming something that made hell itself seem like a mercy. The price of victory was the transformation of an entire species into something that the universe had never seen before, and the long-term consequences of that transformation were still unfolding across the stars.